Good evening, everyone. This is Greg Giardina with J.M. Franklin and Company, and we are glad you could join us this evening. Tonight is the last in our installment series of the New Jersey Faculty Wealth webinar, where tonight we'll be talking all about TIAA Traditional, which I know, as many faculty will say, it can get really confusing. There's a lot of different nuances and can have a lot of implications on your retirement down the road. So tonight we'll be definitely exploring this in depth. And make sure you stay until the end, or we'll have an opportunity to answer all your questions that you have so we can make informed decisions with your accounts. Before we begin, I just need to pull up my slide deck here. So if you give me a minute. All right, so we have quite a few disclosures. I'm not going to go through every single one, but for the information presented tonight, it's for general purposes only. If you're looking for specific advice, please consult with your legal, tax, or financial advisor. Either J.M. Franklin and Company, LPL Financial, or J.M. Franklin and Stratos Wealth Partners are affiliated with TIAA. And of course, if you're looking for specific information on your TIAA plan, please consult your plan document. All right, so now that we have that out of the way, I wanted to, before we dive into TIAA Traditional and how it works and the things you need to be aware of, I thought it would be a great idea to take like an overview of how your retirement plan works, some of the history behind it, so that we can better identify how this TIAA Traditional works and how it might apply to your situation. Excuse me. So inside your retirement plan, your main retirement account, your core account, is what's called your 401A. So if you've heard of 401k, K just stands for private employer. So 401A stands for everyone in higher ed and academia. So I know the IRS makes these things complicated, and this is your main plan. So when you contribute to your retirement plan, your 401A, you contribute 5% and your employer contributes 8%. And this is where your money goes to one of the 7 options currently available. And as we know, TIAA is the most popular choice. It seems like they've been around forever. And an important date to keep in mind is 1995, because prior to 1995, TIAA was the only game in town. There was no other options you can contribute to. So in 1995, the AAUP, your faculty union, fought very hard to bring you choice. And they opened the pension system, your retirement plan, to other different insurance carriers. So some here are Empower, AIG, Voya, Equitable, which used to be AXA, Bright House, which was MetLife, and Prudential, which is now soon to be Empower. So over the years, different companies have come in to offer different retirement choices, but the preponderance of the faculty I work with have TIAA. Moving along, you also have access to a 403B plan. So if you'd like to contribute above and beyond your 401A plan, beyond that 5%, you can contribute to a 403B. And some of the same companies offer the 403B. And for those of our listeners that are over the age of 50, you can contribute up to $27,000 into a 403B plan. And through Prudential, they are the only company that does not offer a 403B. They only offer what's called a 457 plan. And what's important to note, the 403B and the 457 are quite similar in terms of design. Maybe for accessing money, it's a little bit different. So you could see the 59.5 for your 403B, you can actually access your money from one of the carriers in your 403B at age 59.5. So what does that mean? So if you have, let's say, $1 million in TIAA in your 403B, you can actually reposition those monies somewhere else. So if you said, hey, I wanted to work with somebody at Merrill Lynch or UBS, or I want to work with an independent financial advisor, you have the ability at that age to actually reposition your money outside of the retirement plan. And likewise with the Prudential 457 plan, you can only do that when you're separated from service. Take advantage of repositioning those monies somewhere else. So just keep that in mind, just food for thought. Now, this leads us to TIAA and CREF. And I think it's really important that we understand the difference between the two. So I know TIAA is now known as TIAA. They used to be TIAA CREF. And if we look at the left side of the column here, the TIAA, just to think about it, it's the more conservative side. So we need to begin with the fixed annuity. So Greg, what is an annuity? In its simplest form, an annuity is just a contract between you and an insurance company. And you get the option at some point in time, if it's prudent, to say, hey, I want to get lifetime income for the rest of my life. That's all an annuity is. And a fixed annuity pays you a fixed guaranteed rate of interest. And the way you have to think about this is your guaranteed option. When you look at your statement at TIAA, it'll say guaranteed, and that is reflective of TIAA Traditional. And you need to think of this as insurance. So as defined by the federal securities law, a fixed annuity, the TIAA Traditional, is not an investment. It is an insurance contract between you and the insurance company. So generally speaking, it's not liquid. They'll pay you a fixed rate of interest, and depending upon where it's located, you may have a lockup period and you may not have access to your TIAA Traditional if you need it. So it's really important to pay attention to, and we'll talk more about that later in our presentation here. And on the CREF side of things, CREF stands for College Retirement Equities Fund. Equities is just investment jargon for stocks. So on your variable annuity side, variable stands for various funds, and they can fluctuate with their performance, unlike the fixed annuity, which pays a fixed guaranteed minimum rate of interest. So on the CREF side, you're going to see CREF Stock Fund, or CREF Global Equities Fund, or CREF Growth Fund. These are all stock funds. They can also be bond funds, money market funds, and generally speaking, they're liquid. So you can move money between funds at any point in time, and you can even, once you hit 59.5, since we talked in the last slide in the 403B, you can actually reposition those quite easily. All right, so I know this can get really confusing and it probably looks really complicated, but in fact, it's pretty simple. So before we get into the different retirement options that you have available, I put together a little bit of a matrix, if you will, of TIAA Traditional and how to better understand and identify how these different nuances work in each contract. So if we focus on the top left-hand corner, the pre-1995 part of the slide, in the mandatory section, what used to be available, what the core account wasn't the 401A like we just talked about previously. It was actually a 403B, and it was called the retirement annuity. So that was offered pre-1995. And I know that when I meet a professor, a doctor at Robert Wood Johnson, if they've been working for 40, 50 years, the bulk of their wealth will be found in that 403B, that RA contract. Now, for those that wanted to contribute more to their retirement plan, they had a voluntary plan, and that was a 403B as well. And that was dubbed the Supplemental Retirement Annuity, the SRA contract. You don't have to exactly memorize the different names, but you'll see some trends in a minute. So once 1995 hit, instead of having a 403B, it turned into a 401A. So any future contributions you gave to the university went inside this group retirement annuity, this GRA contract. And if you wanted to contribute more, it no longer went to that old pre-95 SRA contract. It went into a group supplemental retirement annuity known as the GSRA. And the one big difference with that is it offered a loan provision. So if you wanted to take a loan, you could take $50,000 or 50% of your account, whichever is lesser. As a financial planner, we typically say to do that only as a last resort. You really don't want to be borrowing from your retirement fund, but it's there regardless. And then in 2015, the new 401A, so excuse me, new contributions would go into this retirement choice contract. And then if you wanted to contribute more into the voluntary plan, it went into the Retirement Choice Plus contract. So to kind of sum this all up here, if you notice on the left-hand column, they're mostly 401As and they have the shorter name. that's how you can identify it. So the GRA has a shorter acronym, that's a 401A, as compared to the GSRA that has more words, the longer acronym, that will be reflective of your voluntary plan. So that's how you kind of have to look at it. The shorter acronym is usually a 401A, while the longer acronym really reflects the 403B. And this will help when we go into dive into the different liquidity restrictions with TIAA Traditional. Hopefully everybody's with me. All right, so to really understand the fixed annuity that can get really confusing, we have to have an understanding of these vintages. So TIAA Traditional pays interest rates, also known as vintages. So you need to think of it like you think of fine wine. So depending upon when your wine was produced, let's say in the 80s or 90s, you maybe got a better vintage, you maybe got a better, higher quality wine. The same can be applied to TIAA with its interest rates. Depending upon the vintages you have, you might have gotten a better set or average of interest rates, depending upon when you contributed in the past. So if we take a look here, I'll get my handy virtual pen, and you can see that from and I'm going to pick on the newest 401A, which is the retirement choice annuity. So that's that 2015 and beyond contract that you have access to, that you're contributing your 5% now. So you can see it was 4.90% from 1941 to 2005. That was the average vintage that you were getting paid on your contributions to TIAA Traditional. And we can see as the years went on, it got lower and lower. And as we know, when coronavirus hit and the market took a dive in March of 2020, interest rates dropped. And on TIAA Traditional, you were maybe getting 3.95% on your contributions. And then they've been slowly going back up with interest rates. So this gives you an idea of what do these vintages look like and how do they get applied. So let's take this a step further. Let's do a little comparison. So Greg, you talked about these 401As, you talked about these 403Bs. What's the difference between the two? So let's take a look. If we look here at the old retirement annuity, and by the way, that was that old 403B, if we remember. And my penmanship virtual pen here isn't the best, but I'm trying. You could see from pre-2006, it was paying about 4.65. So we really have to compare that to the same plan in the same year. And that was, once again, more the longer acronym here, supplemental retirement annuity. We could see that was paying about 3.90%. And you can see as we go on through the years, the difference, if you do the math, it's about 75 basis points in difference. And now if we look at the retirement choice contract, if you remember that that's the 401A that everybody's contributing to now, that's paying about 4.90%. And if we look at the retirement choice plus plan, more words, more acronyms, we know that's a 403B, right? We could see it's going to be about a 75 basis points difference. So the 403B, generally speaking, pays 75 basis points less than the 401A, with the exception of that old 403B that was pre-1995. All right, so this is where it gets maybe a little bit interesting here. So now that we have a good understanding of the pre-95, the 95, 2015, this also gives you an idea of, well, what happens during retirement? I get these great vintages, these interest rates while I'm working, but when I retire, what are the options I can do? I hear there's a lot of liquidity restrictions. So let's dive into it. So in that old 403B, you have the following options. You can annuitize. So annuitizing, all it is you're giving a lump sum, your retirement money, to the insurance company and saying, hey, pay me for the rest of my life. And they'll make you payments. And they can do that either over your single life. So they can pay you for the rest of your life. If you live to age 110, they'll be on the hook to paying you for however long you live, which can be really nice, a guaranteed income you can't outlive. They can also do it over not only your life, but over your spouse's life as well. So once you pass, your wife can be covered or your spouse can be covered. So not only can you do a single life, a joint and survivor annuity as well, but they have two other flavors or two other options. One is called the fixed period annuity, which is just like it sounds. They'll pay you for 10, 15, 20 years, and that's it. So even if you live past 20 years, you will not get paid for your entire lifetime. You'll get bigger lumps, bigger monthly payments, but that's another feature. And then finally, another annuitized option that you have is what's called the period certain, or as TIAA calls it, a guarantee certain. So it's basically like if you want to put insurance on your annuity. So I'll give you an example. If I'm married and I have beneficiaries, and I'm concerned that if I buy a 20-year period certain annuity, I want to make sure that I'm getting paid for 20 years. Well, what happens if my wife and I, we die in year 2? Well, what happens to the other 18 years worth of payments? Well, if you have a period certain, it's basically like buying additional insurance for your annuity. If you and your wife pass in year 2, well, for the remaining 18 years, TIAA will pay your beneficiary. So those are, from a high level view, some of the options you can do with that annuitization. And once again, you have to be careful before you do it. There's many implications. You also have what's called a TPA. A TPA is what's called a transfer payout annuity. All it means is if you don't want to have your money in the TIAA traditional choice, you can transfer it over 9 years, over 10 annual payments. So for example, if I'm age 60 and I want to retire at age 70, well, at age 60, I could say, you know what, let me begin this TPA so that I can get my money out over the next 9 years so that by the time I retire, I can now enjoy it fully liquid. However, what most don't know is that when they do this TPA, you actually lose some interest on your minimum guarantee on your fixed annuity. So there are some minimum guarantees that you get with your fixed annuity. It could be 3% for some of these contracts. And then, of course, TIA pays additional monies or additional amounts. So it comes to those averages we showed you, like that 4.9% in that vintage chart, and then it dropped down to 3.95%. But when you do the TPA, you can lose 0.5% on the minimum guarantee. So it can get really confusing, but basically TIAA, they ding you if you do a TPA. And finally, you can also do one of two things in retirement. In the 403B contract only, you can just take the interest off of those payments. So if TIAA Traditional is paying you 4.5%, you could say, you know what, I just want to live on the interest. That's it. I don't want to touch my principal. But you can only do that up until age 71. Because at age 72, for most folks, they have to take what's called required minimum distributions. That's RMDs in there. So you can only take interest only up until age 71. At age 71, you have to take now required minimum distributions. So in a nutshell, that's your options. And we can kind of run through this a little bit quicker now. Now, here's something really important to know. The 403B on that old pre-95 contract is 100% liquid. This is a huge deal. Not only can you do the other options that, for the most part, that the 403B has, but you could do whatever you want with it. So if you want to move it somewhere else in a lump sum, there's no liquidity restrictions. Life is nice and easy, and it's not as nearly as complicated as having the money in the other contract. So keep that in mind. And if you remember, it's about a 75 basis point difference, as we just talked about. Now, moving along, the 401A, which is the newer, not the newest, but one of the newer contracts, you can do a similar type of arrangement. So you can annuitize with all the options I just spoke about. You can do a TPA, which is also 10 annual installments over 9 years. So if I have $1 million in TIAA Traditional in my GRA contract, I can take out $111,000 over the next 9 years, which will get me to my full $1 million. But there's one caveat here. You actually can do what's called a lump sum withdrawal. So for the price of about and I'm sorry, my penmanship is terrible here. I got to work on this virtual penmanship. you can actually pay a 2.5% penalty up front, and you can make that entirely liquid. So in other words, if I have 100,000 in TIAA Traditional in my GRA contract, you can pay $25,000, I'm sorry, $2,500 on 100,000, and you can be done with it and not have to worry about it. But you can only do it within 120 days after you separate from service and you retire. So keep that in mind. And then once again, interest only in RMDs. So hopefully everybody's still with me now. I know it can be a lot. And then once again, the 403B version, the GSRA is 100% liquid. So once again, nice and easy for some of the savvier professors, doctors out there. You want to be locating your TIAA Traditional in these accounts if you can. And then finally, with the 401A, what we have here, they can do some of the similar options compared to the GRA, except the fixed period annuity, which we talked about. So if you said, hey, I just wanted to get paid for 15, 20 years, you can't do that. You can only do the period guarantee, which can guarantee you for the same period, but also extend beyond that if you and your wife live beyond 20 years. And the other nuance is that instead of having 10 annual installments over 9 years, if you did a TPA, this is 84 monthly installments over 7 years. So I know this can get really confusing, really convoluted really quickly. But once again, the 403B, since 2015, if you've been contributing, that is 100% liquid. All right, so bringing this on home, what are some of the things we should be thinking about before we decide to add to TIAA Traditional, or we decide to annuitize? How do we know which is really the best option for us? And once again, everybody's different. It's on a case-by-case basis, but I really want to jump into this. So remember, when you put more money into TIAA Traditional, you're putting money into insurance. You're basically trying to hedge your risk of outliving your retirement monies. And you really have to look at what percentage of your portfolio or your future expenses are going to be guaranteed. So what I mean by that is, generally speaking, most financial experts, most financial planners will say that you should have no more than 20 to 30% in guaranteed income sources in the context of a broader stock and bond portfolio. Now, everyone can be different, but the reason for that is that when you put money into insurance, you're giving a lot of profit to the insurance company potentially. So you really have to be focused on that. And also you need to be aware of, well, how much do I have in Social Security? That is a guaranteed source of income. How much do I have in pensions? My husband and I. So before you add to TIAA Traditional, you should be aware of how much your Social Security is and what percentage does that make up of your guaranteed portion, because you may find out that you may have more than enough in guaranteed income. So you really need to work with somebody that can project out into the future. If I need $100,000 per year to live on in retirement, adjusting for inflation, well, what percentage of the assets do I have now, including Social Security, does that pay for? So that's really important. And that brings me to my next caveat that we have to think about or consideration is the liquidity restrictions. So one of the biggest mistakes I see being made on campuses, whether it's Rutgers, whether it's here in New Jersey, is they don't think about the long-term implications. They're just looking at it from a short-term lens. So let me give you an example. If you've looked at bond performance year to date, it hasn't been pretty. There's a lot of core bonds that are down 5 to 10%. And I may sit with a faculty member and they may say, well, Greg, hey, my bond funds are down 5 or 10%, but TIAA Traditional is paying 5.5%. No brainer. Why don't I just sell my bonds and I buy TIAA Traditional? Well, they don't realize that they're going to be really restricted down the road when they try to access this money, as we just reviewed. And second, they're doing the opposite of investing 101. What they're doing is they're selling their bonds and they're losing 5, 10%, and now they're buying TIAA Traditional. So in essence, you're actually selling low and you're buying high. You should precisely do the opposite of that. You want to buy low and sell high. And right now you can make an argument with bonds that the price is low and that you can get them on sale and that the future expected returns actually look good for core bonds in more than a decade. So just like you want to buy stocks when things are on sale, you may want to look at some bonds, certain types of bonds when they're on sale as well. So keep in mind. And in terms of annuitizing your account, it's not always a bad thing, but you do give up control of your money. So if you have $1 million and you say, hey, TIAA or the insurance company, pay me over the rest of my life, you do not have access to that money anymore. It is with the insurance company, they're on the hook, they have to make payments. It's irrevocable. So make sure before you do it, it's appropriate for you. And there are some situations where it can be very appropriate, which I'll get into in a minute, but just make sure that you're aware of not only what you're doing, but you may also want to shop out other annuities. So maybe, and granted, TIAA is very competitive in the space, but maybe New York Life has a better immediate annuity. You really want to do your due diligence. Now, as far as the legacy goes, if you're not as concerned about your children or your grandchildren getting a legacy from your retirement, that would swing the pendulum towards annuitization, right? Because you really don't care what you get left behind. You just care that you're getting the income every month, every year. So legacy can be very important. And if it is important and you want to leave more money to your children, your grandchildren, an annuity may not make a lot of sense because you are paying to have those guarantees. And also longevity is also a very important component. Generally speaking, the longer time horizon you have to live, the more money or the more on the hook the insurance company will be. And if you're not supposed to have a, excuse me, long life expectancy, well, then having an annuity could be a bad bet. And you may not get a good return on your annuity. So you really have to take these things into consideration. Everyone's different, and you really need to review your options. How much is guaranteed, especially from the perspective of your future expenses, to be able to make an intelligent decision. All right, so we just covered a whole lot here, and I think now would be a good time for some questions. So if you have one, just put it in the Q&A box, the chat box, and we can get some of these answered. All right, so we have a question here. How does annuitization rates work from a payout perspective? I'm so glad somebody asked this question. So when you annuitize your contract, the two main determinants are your age and what interest rates are currently paying. Now, of course, if you pick a single life annuity and you annuitize, that will give you the highest payout because the insurance company just has to worry about one life. They're on the hook for one life expectancy. So of course, if you pick joint and survivor, if you add insurance to your annuity and do a period certain, those will, of course, change the payout rate that you'll get paid. But really, the biggest determinant is your age. Interest rates are a factor, but studies show that age plays more into this because of something called mortality credits, which I won't go into now. But essentially how annuities work is when everybody buys an annuity, they're basically getting into this pool of money with the insurance company. And if Dr. A lives shorter than anticipated, well, that's extra money in the pool. So for those that are living longer than expected and maybe live to, let's say, age 110, well, they get to go into that pool and get some of that excess reserve and get that payout in their pay. So it's a nice way for those that beat the system, that do live longer than the insurance companies anticipate, to maybe earn a little bit more than they'd be able to normally. So remember, interest rates, age, but mostly age will be a big determinant of your payout rate. All right, another question here is, do I have to annuitize all of my TIAA Traditional? Another great question. So you have the ability to pick and choose which contracts you would like to annuitize or not. So you could say, hey, I have this old RA contract where I have these really nice vintages. You know what? I'd like to turn on the spigot and say, you know what? Let me annuitize that portion. And for some of the newer vintages, the newer 401s, well, you know what? I want to just take interest only, or I want to take required minimum distributions only. You can mix and match. You do not have to, it's not a one or nothing proposition, and it's pretty flexible. So part of what our team does is we'll actually look through your vintages that you have to come up with the strategy that's most appropriate for your family. So hopefully I answered your question there. All right, we'll give it another minute. All right, so another question here, how do RMDs work? So the best way to answer this question is with a date. So were you born after July 1st, 1949? If you were born after July 1st, 1949, you are mandatorily required to take out some of your monies from your 401A and 403B, your monies that you've never been taxed on. So for the bulk of a academic's wealth, they usually contribute on a pre-tax basis. So every time you make a contribution to Rutgers, you don't pay taxes on the contribution. Every $100 you save goes directly to TIAA to be invested in their annuities, whether it's on the fixed side or the variable side, which we just spoke about. So if you haven't taken money from those accounts, by the time you retire, you will have to be required to take required minimum distributions by at least age 72. Now, there's other nuances to that. If you're still working while you're age 72, 73, with your current employer plan, you can actually delay having to take a percentage of your retirement plan. That's another topic for another time, but generally speaking, you may have to take a certain percentage. It may be 3.5%, 4% when you reach age 72. And by the time you reach your 90s, every year you're taking money out, you hit maybe closer to 10% that you have to take out no matter what. So that's just the IRS rules. Don't kill the messenger, but hopefully that explains it for you. All right, so that does it for this evening. I hope you learned a little bit, or a lot, rather, about TIAA Traditional, how it works, how you can perhaps think about this in a better way, and how to strategically and tactically think about your retirement portfolio, pay attention to the 403B side of things that's very liquid, and then how to think about your options in retirement and how to treat this unique fixed annuity that TIAA has. So once again, we appreciate you coming out this evening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your summer. Be on the lookout for the next webinar coming next month, and in September. It'll be more education around your retirement plan, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care. Have a great night.